Hello, internet friends. I have been reading a lot of cookbooks, especially lately, and that may be because COVID-19 world, and I've been extra at home, extra quarantined from other people. So I've had more time to reflect about all of these cookbooks, food cultures. I feel like it's a whole subject I am just beginning to excavate, beginning to get some understandings of what it means to me and to humans, which is a lot for like cookbooks, but if you bear with me, I think you might agree at least a little by the end. So let's talk about books. Are you looking for a book that will make you cry while you read recipes? I've got the book for you. It's called In Memory's Kitchen, a legacy from the women of Terezin. Terezin began as a town. It had a large Jewish population, which was just part of the town. When the German soldiers took over, they renamed it Terezinstadt. They made it a transit ghetto. Many of the people in the first few years who were held prisoner in Terezinstadt were the more notable Jewish people from their community. They were the writers, the theater actors, the people who had been more wealthy or had better government connections. They were held in what was sort of a Potemkin village. It was there to create at least a veneer that what was happening to the Jews maybe wasn't so bad. Here's a model town that we can show you, that when people show up, we can give everyone some extra food, we can get the kids to be singing songs, and we can create a little charade. The reality of what was actually happening at Terezinstadt was a horror show, and became more so over the years as it was less of a Potemkin village and became more just a short stop on the way to Auschwitz. The people who lived there were all starving. There are drawings in this book, a few of them, of very skinny people fighting over potato peelings, just as a quick example. Because desperate long stretches of hunger was such a common experience for the people, one of their practices that became widespread was writing down recipes of the food that they longed to eat, not only to sustain their bodies, which were wasting away, but also to sustain their spirit and their culture, because Hitler was not only trying to extinguish the individual Jews, but Jewish culture as a whole, which means that for these women, it was an act of pretty grand defiance to write down recipes, and also just a clear longing for better times, for when their bellies were full and they could share food with those that they love. I want to read quickly a bit from the introduction. Bianca Steiner Brown, the translator of the recipes in this book, and herself a former inmate of Terezin, explains it this way. In order to survive, you had to have an imagination. Fantasies about food were like a fantasy that you have about how the outside is if you are inside. You knew how it was, but you imagined it was even better than it was. And that's how it was also with food. Talking about it helped. Most of us can understand that. Far more disquieting is the idea that people who were undernourished, even starving, not only reminisced about the foods, but also had discussions, even arguments about the correct way to prepare the dishes that they might never again be able to eat. The hunger was so enormous that one constantly cooked something that was an unattainable ideal, and maybe somehow it was a certain help to survive it all, wrote Jaroslav Budlovsky on a death march from Schwarzschild to Terezin in 1943. And Susan E. Cernick Spatz, professor emeritus at the University of North Carolina and a survivor of Terezin and Auschwitz, describes people in both places as speaking of food so much there was a camp expression for it. We called it cooking with the mouth. So these are starving people. Imagining is the only option that they have. Not only was food incredibly scarce, but so was paper. So there actually is a picture in the book. I'm not going to bother showing it, but there's a picture in the book of several recipes written on a propaganda pamphlet with a picture of Hitler. What a strong, rebellious, defiant group of women that they took this bit of paper with a picture of the person who is trying to wipe them out, their family out, their culture out, everyone they love and care about. He's trying to kill them, and they wrote down recipes, things that they made for their children, things that they made for their husbands, meals that they shared with their family as a child. These are important cultural artifacts. And the recipes themselves, they're short, they're not super descriptive. They expect me to know the recipe to make a pie dough. I do not offhand know how to make a pie dough. I need a recipe for baking stuff. But back then they all would have known because they didn't have the internet to look up recipes. I think this book and books like this are important, and I suggest it as one to read and see what these women were longing for. The next book I want to talk about is Burma Superstar: Addictive Recipes from the Crossroads of Southeast Asia by Desmond Tan and Kate Leahy. The country formerly known as Burma is now called Myanmar, has been for several decades. The book is named after a restaurant or chain of them now in San Francisco and Oakland. People who lived in Burma when it was still Burma refer to the country that way, but generally it is referred to now as Myanmar. It was very interesting to read about some of the foods of Myanmar because they are kind of their own Pan-Asian deal. Myanmar is located between India, China, Laos, and Thailand, and then it's on the Bay of Bengal and Andaman Sea. Desmond Tan goes back to Myanmar for recipe research and photography to sort of show us what the country is like, different regions are like, what some of the food looks like also, don't you want to go on a trip? You can't go anywhere right now, but you can if you go on a trip in your mind with books. Travel the world. There are so many good ones. Transportation of tea leaves. Recipes that sort of most stood out to me. One was what I had been calling Burmese tofu. He refers to as shan tofu. It's basically a chickpea polenta. There are also recipes for how to use the shan tofu, and they also, speaking of garbanzo flour, apparently they use that in their soups as a thickener so much that he recommends just like pre-toasting your garbanzo flour and keeping it sealed in a jar, because like you're going to be using it so much you don't have time to toast it in the moment. You need it pre-toasted on hand, ready to go. They use samosas, like cut up leftover samosas in their soup. And they also have a salad recipe with samosas. That makes so much sense. It's like a really tasty crouton. So apparently in Myanmar, half of all the tea consumed is eaten, not drunk. And like they drink a lot of tea, but they they just eat more of it. They eat pickled tea leaves or fermented tea leaves. He talks about areas where teas are grown and that there's a difference between the ones that are grown here and over here. And the ones over here are like, those are the really extra good ones. And if they're picked during certain seasons, then they're even better. And they might have less of the bitter notes and more of like a mango type fruity flavor. He describes how they are traditionally fermented. Then they often will use the fermented pickled tea leaves in salads as a tiny little side with large meal, throw it in soup. He has a recipe for like tea leaf dressing, tea leaf rice salad, just a tea leaf salad. Anyhow, he has a recipe for approximating the flavors of fresh fermented tea leaves, and I'm really excited to try that at some point. I can't possibly give you everything that's in there, but if this is the kind of thing that interests you, check it out, man. It's so worth it. Okay, the next book is gonna sound like it's cheating a little bit, but it's not. Bear with me for a second. When the River Ran Wild, Indian Traditions on the Mid-Columbia and the Warm Springs Reservation by George W. Aguilar Sr. George is a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, and George is writing as an elder of his tribe to current tribes members and future generations to pass on cultural knowledge, cultural history, personal stories, family relations, naming traditions. There's quite a bit of cultural tradition in here beyond food culture. So there's much more to this book than I'm going to have time to talk about, but I do specifically want to call out some of the food practices that George describes and why, as a white lady in Oregon, I think it's important for me to read this, be familiar with this, to talk about it with you and encourage you to read this or books like this. So what are the food practices that George describes? There's a description of a place near our ski lodge up on Mount Hood where his tribes people used to, and still do to a smaller degree, gather huckleberries when they came in season. He describes acorns and how those were processed for nutrition. There's description of the harvesting and preparation methods for camas bulbs because they're not especially desirable when you first dig them up. They take preparation. There is not as much wetland as there used to be to harvest camas root, nor is there as easy access to bury the camas bulbs or the acorn nuts in clay beds next to the river so that when the water runs through slowly the clay, it will help leach out some of the tannins and make those foods a easier to digest, more nutritious food for them without high intensity labor. There is not as much wild native hazelnut or easy access to eels and arrowroot and cattails. It's much harder for them to hunt deer and elk because burn practices haven't been continued, which means that there's not as much upland grassland for those large herd animals to graze. Indian traditions are not just history. It is not cultures that are dead and only in the past. These are people who are also living and trying their best to carry on these traditions as makes sense to them individually in the modern world. Much of those foodways are less, and understanding that helps me have a deeper understanding of why budget measures to preserve wildlands might be important. It's not just about Audubon Society trying to save local birds, it's also giving rights of access to current local tribes members who are seeking to continue their traditional ways to eat some of their sacred and traditional and preferred foods. It's important for me to know some of these practices and some of this history so that as a person who really enjoys going out in nature to forage, I don't harvest foods that are too scarce for tribespeople to find or that are in any ecological danger. If it's not plentiful, don't pick it. There's quite a bit more. I mean, there's a lot more than I remotely have time to talk about, but if you live anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, I highly recommend this book. It's rare to find work that is written by a Native American about his own family, his own tribe, his own cultural practices. And if you live somewhere on the other side of the world, I hope you can find something similar for your region. But even so, it's a fascinating read. I mean, this is just part of a current culture as well as our world history. So if you find anything about history and food and ecological practices as they impact cultural practices, this is a book for you. And if you're not interested in any of that, what are you doing here? This is the last book of the day, and I love this one. It's called Caucasus, a cookbook, a culinary journey through Georgia, Azerbaijan, and beyond by Olia Hercules. Georgia and Azerbaijan are between Russia, Turkey, Armenia, and Iran. So it's another culinary region that is kind of at those crossroads between several other cultures. It is also on sea and, you know, these high mountains with fertile valleys. She's broken up her cookbook, roots, shoots, leaves and all, flour and ash, which is more the, you know, baking breads type area of the book, beasts from land, sea, and air, pain be gone, which like is a little bit of the foods you would eat if you were sick, but mostly it's an entire chapter of hangover cures. And like I love that she decided to include that. Sweet in the tooth, and then ingredients and sources. This is another sort of travelogue type book. Some of the travel photos. You know, some of the staged photos. Apparently, they have an extra ingrained sense that you eat the foods that are in season. They do have a bit of pickling and preserving, but most of what they eat is foraged or harvested in season, used in season. According to her, they eat like a surprisingly small amount of meat. Hardly any meat recipes in this book. If they do eat it, it's a small amount and it's not with every meal. Also sounds like they don't have much of a tradition of sweets. They have several sauces that they make either from fermented plums or from vinegared plums to preserve them and concentrate the flavors, and they use those in all their soups and sauces. One of the most exciting things in the book to me is this red ajika salt. Variations of this are used all the time in Georgian cooking. I have made a version of it after reading this book, and it's honestly like the newest flavor with the most unique, complicated culmination of flavors, spectacular, and I have plans to do it again and try it in new ways. It was like revelatory. The ingredients for red ajika salt, it uses blue fenugreek. Apparently it's a milder flavor, but it's much smoother, easier on the bitter end. Coriander, dried marigold petals. I found myself using marigold in my cooking quite a bit more. The petals as well as the greens. The flavor To me, it's spectacular. I don't understand why it isn't used more. Garlic cloves, sea salt, and some of the variations that I have seen from my online research also include mint. And that I did that. That was great. And then either dried cayenne pepper or fresh paprika pepper, depending on if you want to do a dry salt or a wet salt. I did mine a wet version, and since I was using the Indian fenugreek, that's what I had, and I knew there was more bitter, I added some dates to offset the bitter with some sweet, but probably a closer culinary choice would be to go for plums because they use a lot of plums in their cooking. It was so good. Yeah, so like the Myanmar book, it's just another one where I really didn't know anything about this region, these people, these foods. I enjoyed this one very much, and even though I've had it a couple months from the library, I'm gonna have to get this one again at some point and spend a little more time with it. But that Ajika salt, it blew my mind. That's it for that one. Hope you check it out, and I hope you like it as much as I did. Okay, we made it all the way through all the books. I know I went kind of in depth on each of those, but I just don't see how I can go shorter on those than I did and still give even a brief outline of what the book is like, what the culture that the recipes are contained within, what that's like, where the food is coming from. So let me know what you think about the time format. Should it really be shorter? Are you okay with the longer format? Oh, and if you have any recommendations of other books you think I might enjoy, ones that get really personal with food stories or are really embedded in the culture that they come from. I just think it's a fascinating way to learn about people, science, history, current events, what's important to people. It's all kind of caught up in food. If you found any of this interesting, I mean, first off, please give me that like for the video. I hear that kind of thing is very helpful for videos to find an audience, but also I would just love to know what parts of the video were interesting to you so that I don't feel so much like Belle dancing around the village, talking to all the villagers about, I just read the most interesting book, and all of them in the cartoon as well as in real life just so much don't want to hear about all of my exciting food knowledge I just learned. But like, no, really, it's so interesting. Let me tell you what I just learned about umami, or this practice that they have in Georgia and why that's interesting compared to something that I've read about in India. And I don't know, all of that is so exciting and interesting to me. Earlier, we talked about the Warm Springs Reservation is currently either on a boil water notice if they're lucky enough to have any water coming into their homes. It's unsafe to drink and must be boiled first, or much of the reservation has no water pressure at all, no water coming in. So if you are at all inclined towards mutual aid for people who, you know, kind of need water to drink to stay alive, I have already made a donation. I'm going to provide a link down below for their fundraiser. Follow the link and help them out with at least a few bucks, more if you can. It's important and they need some help. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back. I really want someone to talk about food with. Thanks. Bye. See you next time. If you made it this far, give the video a like and think about subscribing if you're into any of the food nerdery that includes, you know, urban harvesting and wild crafting and fermenting and general food experiment shenanigans that mostly end up surprisingly delicious. That's the kind of thing I'm into.